I am the curator of the walkie-talkies this year, and I'm doing a walkie-talkie. I'm very lucky. And it's a tremendous pleasure for me to be doing the walkie-talkie with a couple. They are married. As you can see, they're very in love. They still are kissing each other. È bellissimo. And they are from Toronto, Canada, and came all the way from Toronto, Canada to be with all of you here in Turin. And we are going to see 5 artists at 4 galleries, so it's not too much. Stay close to us. But we are going to, as we walk, we're going to talk a little bit about how they collect, how they work with the museums, how their histories have influenced why they are passionate about art. And we'll talk a little bit about my practice as a curator and a former museum director. I am Iranian American living in Mexico City and Berlin. So I'm the nightmare of President Trump. I am a full-fledged immigrant in every sense of the way. So we're going to start, and I would first like to pass it so that you say a little bit about you all.
Okay. I too am an immigrant. My parents were immigrants to Canada, and I grew up with art books instead of children's books because my parents couldn't afford to buy anything. So through the years, my parents educated me by taking me to a lot of museums. And then when I met David, when I was 23, I walked into his family's home and I thought, I won't swear, but holy crap. They have an amazing collection. Through the years, we've done almost everything. Our vacations, our private time evolves around artists and art. Our home is filled with it. David believes, and he'll talk about it, but you live with art. It adds meaning to your life. And through that, we've gotten involved in art institutions in our city and beyond. We sit on boards. We help fund art projects. And we come to beautiful cities like Turin to meet new people, new dealers, new curators. And it's a very gifted life we have.
So Yvonne gave a little background. I definitely grew up in an art world. My father was a pretty, good collector in the 1960s and 1970s, and collected artists like Jasper Johns and Lichtenstein and Oldenburg and Christo. So these are the kind of things that I was seeing as I was growing up. And when we were coming here to the fair, we took a good look at the artists, and one of the artists, in fact, the only artist that I really knew, quite frankly, was Beverly Pepper. And this is where we're coming up right now. My parents collected Beverly Pepper in the 1960s and I guess early 70s. When we mentioned this to Abaseh, she said, that there's a great section here called Back to the Future, and I spent a lot of hours here, and we should take a good look at it. Because a lot of these artists, who are female, by the way, I think it's roughly 80% of the artists here are female, a lot of them had been forgotten. And I thought, what? I'd totally forgotten about Beverly Pepper. And so when we came and took a look at the work, reminded me, I would say, kind of core influences in the kind of art selection that we make. There is her work. Goes back to the 60s. She started doing sculptural work in 1962. She was very much inspired by a trip she took to Cambodia, where she saw artifacts. And so a lot of her work sort of came out of that idea of having these artifacts can be brought back to life, although they all look quite old. And one of the materials she uses that is actually a material that I'm quite fond of is Corten steel. In fact, our house, our exterior is Corten steel and Douglas fir wood. And so when we look at a lot of sculptural work, Corten steel or that hard metals, that rough look, that older look is something that is very much of appeal to us. And so Beverly Pepper, this is some of her work from the 1980s, but she has a fantastic catalog of work. She's 94 years old now. I think is one of the great American artists And hopefully, I'm hoping that she has success at the fair today.
I would like to share that it's true what David said, and I would like to know your thoughts, Yvonne. I wanted to say about this entire section, Back to the Future, for me as a colleague, as a curator, I did not know, I would say 70% of the artists that are presented by my colleagues in this section, and I found it to be just beautiful. I spent probably about 3.5 hours walking through each of the booths with Anna Danieri, and it was really lovely. So it just goes to show you that even those of us that work in the medium, are curators or museum directors, don't know everything, which is why diversity of opinion is always a nice one. So for you to listen or go to different kinds of museums and look at the work of different curators, museum directors, writers is always interesting, because we all have a different eye and look at different kinds of work and what inspires us. So I was thrilled that David had a personal story that was connected. How do you feel about this work?
Well, when I look at the work, it actually links really well into what we collect now. We're really interested in the natural landscape and architecture and design. And when I look at these, I hadn't seen these in years. They're very different than what David's parents have, but they do remind me of the inside of a flower. I guess they're called the pistils and the stamens. I think I'm saying that right. So they are too very, very natural. And David's family, they have 5 Beverly peppers, from paintings to sculptures inside and outside. And something that we love is the work that we buy, are lucky to buy, is very, very quiet. And sometimes you walk by it and you don't see it, but then every once in a while you do. And I think what's great about David's parents is they have many of them in the garden, and depending on the time of year, you notice them more or less, and that creates change. It just, you look at things differently when nature changes. Right now, the leaves are completely orange and red in the city, and in Toronto, and having something like this behind is, or within, is very beautiful.
I would like to ask both of you, maybe we start with you, David. Having parents that collected, how did it form you, and how did you all start your collecting? Was there a process that you followed?
Well, I think we should make an admission to everyone here that there's a lot we don't know, and a lot for us to learn. So when we go to any show, there are a lot of artists we don't know. So just getting back to your question, then, the influence is almost I think it almost becomes intuitive. Yvonne's, is much more structured than I am, and has a strategy, and it's very firm. I have to say I'm a little more intuitive than she is, and I would say the influences from my parents provided that intuitive backbone for me when we look at art. When we started collecting, quite frankly, we wanted to do it in a very simple fashion. We actually started with photography, easier to understand. Well, yeah, but that was just one. We really started with photography because. First of all, art is expensive. Photography is everyone nodding their head? Photography is less expensive. Photography we found much easier to understand. So that's really how we started. That gave us sort of the confidence to start breaking out from that. So we went for photography and then began to broaden out into paintings, some mixed media work, and sculptural work.
When we started out, we also started Canadian. We looked at what we thought was contemporary in our city, and our city didn't have a lot of art in it or a lot of dealers, but we had an amazing dealer who carried what we thought was very contemporary work, which was sculpture from the north of Canada by the Inuit. And so that's what we started collecting, and now that we're here, we'll stop this narrative and go over to Abaseh.
We're here at KOW Gallery from Berlin, and we're by work of FRANZ Walther, and he won the Golden Lion in Venice Biennale this year, and he is 79 years old. And I have to, we each have a story about the work. And actually, we thought David would activate the work for us to activate. No.
So what you see now is that these works actually exist in a way that how they relate to a person. So they like Franz Walther likes to use the term activation. So when a piece is just a material, it's just material, but it needs to have like a human kind of element, like somebody using it, like you, he would call it activation, using it. Or there can be like different ways of aligning the works, like finding different variations in terms of space. You could actually separate these two pieces.
I have to say that I was so surprised that Franz Walther was the age he was. The first time I was attracted to the work, my aesthetic is very minimal, it's very abstract, and I saw these bold colors and these very abstract shapes, and so I was attracted initially because of that aesthetic. But then I discovered that it was asking me to engage with it. So it was very sculptural in that way, and you could interact with it. And I just thought that that's beautiful. And then to find out that he had been doing this so many years before the newer generations of artists that are trying to find ways for you to activate works of theirs was just kind of eye-opening and transformative for me. So it says a lot that in 2017 he is the winner of the Golden Lion. It means that we are finally starting to look at artists, and you don't have to be a complete academic, but understand the importance of that context and the people that created that language, which then the younger artists are using and appropriating and trying to evolve, but giving their place and understanding what their work meant.
And I think this is a case where it's easy to walk by this work. It looks so quiet, and yet there is so much history in it. I first saw his work at the Power Plant, which is in Toronto. It's a great contemporary gallery that doesn't collect, that has very, very challenging programming. And they brought in a massive show of his. And when you first walk in, this show, everything was folded canvas, beautifully folded, just sitting there. And what you're supposed to do is go up and unfold it and activate it. And the most simple one, and the one that I've seen the most photos in the past, is it's just a long loop of canvas, and one person gets in it, it wraps around your waist, and you go back a little, and then the other person does the same thing, and all of a sudden you have a very tight, elegant, very elegant sculpture. But what's really, really interesting is he won the prize at Venice, but the works that were in Venice this year were from the 70s and 80s. And I think collectors and museums forgot about his work, but I don't think artists forgot about his work. I think it was being taught in school. And if you go through, and we go as often as we can, wherever we go, we try and have an art moment. We went to Documenta this year, and it was really clear that younger artists are looking at his work. And I think that is a great legacy for him.
He's definitely an artist, and I think that, there are artists that are artists. They're not doing it for the market or to be famous. They are doing it because they are trying to create a new language, and he's definitely one of them. I also want to say, since we are in a fair context, I find, and maybe you all can share as we walk to the next booth, I find that I'm often attracted, even as a curator, to galleries that have a lot of integrity, that have a very focused mission with the kind of artists that they work with. And KOW is one of those galleries. I first noticed them through their texts. I would give the text, even if they were on artists that I did not know very well, to my curatorial assistants to read, because they were the best texts. So if we have any students here, some of the best exhibition texts are written and are on their website. And then I started following their program and seeing that they have this tremendous commitment to a certain vision. It might not be everyone's vision, it's their vision, and they're very committed to it. And so you see a thread in all their artists. We're choosing to speak of one, but they have other wonderful artists, and you find similarities, even if the mediums are different, even if the focus is different, but you see that. And that's something that you also, in a fair context, you can tell in the way a booth is installed, the commitment to the way a booth is installed. Those are all indicators to the kind of gallery that you're seeing. Do you find that in your collecting, you find, and let's walk as we do it.
We definitely gravitate to certain dealers. I won't mention them here, but and it's because of exactly what Abaseh said. And what happens is a good dealer won't sell to you, they'll educate you. And they will send you great texts. They will set up, when you travel and they know you're going to Turin, they'll set up a visit to someone that they think we might enjoy. And one of the dealers we bought a lot of work from, he recently passed away. He came and visited us many times, and we knew he was sick. And so David went to visit him in Paris. He set up a gallery room for us, knowing that we would love all that work. And that is a special relationship to build. Abaseh, I'm going to give this back to you because I don't want to monopolize.
Okay, so David, you shared, if you feel comfortable, a story that I didn't know about how you all began. And I kind of loved hearing about you approaching this as one would, any kind of passion, you want to, in some ways, have some rigor and do it well. Do you feel comfortable sharing?
Oh, sure. So when we started out, the contemporary art is tough. It's tough because it's very hard to appreciate a piece until one kind of understands the context of the piece and the story behind the piece, and that takes a lot of work. We're still walking, and so we decided to get help actually at the beginning, and we were referred to a gentleman in Toronto who was collecting very, very young contemporary artists, and we approached him to help us, to give us some direction, and just as importantly, to give us introductions to top galleries, to allow us to build a relationship with the galleries, which is to us a very important part of the process that Yvonne was referring to earlier. And that was what really created kind of the infrastructure that we started with to build sort of the core components of the of our collection so far, at least.
What was really great about this person is he recommended we not buy any artworks for a year. He gave us a stack of books about this high, and he said you have to look and you have to read. And you have to really think carefully about a strategy, something that interests you, a theme. He said, otherwise, you'll have a lot of interesting works, but they won't talk to each other. There won't be a dialogue between them. And it was a really good piece of advice, and we are still friends with Marshall. We still admire him. He lives in Vancouver now. But we've developed lasting relationships, and we have, I think, a collection that really does dialogue, the works dialogue with each other.
So as we walk through this doorway, it is a work of Mike Nelson. We're not going to talk about him, but he's one of my absolute favorite artists. He represented Great Britain in the Venice Biennale. And his work, when I saw the pavilion, was incredibly transformative for me. We're in Franco Noero Gallery. This is a gallery based in Turin. I have to say that, honestly, the reason I came to Turin the first time was because of Franco Noero. He invited me to Turin because he said they had wonderful institutions, and I had met them in the fair context, and I loved the way that he presented his artists. And I came, and he and Pierpaolo Falone, we're talking about your integrity and your love for your artists. How long has the gallery been? How long have you had the gallery?
I opened the gallery in 1999.
And can you tell me about your first space?
The first space was a 28-30 square meter. There was a storefront with a nice large window in a very commercial street of Torino.
And how about the beautiful building Fette di Polenta? How did that happen?
There was a third space I had here. Well, Torino is very interesting because we have a good real estate market, good in the sense that it's not very expensive. So also a gallery like my gallery at the beginning was able to to change the different spaces, to move from one to another one, and so which is a real luxury in a way. So the Feta di Polenta was we, you know, sometimes, you know, you really love at first sight. This happened to me and my wife for this building. We bought it at an auction from the court, and then I transformed it into an art gallery. It was at the site of this project of the gallery for 5.5 years. So we did something like 20 projects over there.
So each of your artists did a show in
Not all of them. 2 of them they refused, and one of them is not working with us anymore, and the other one was too difficult for his work. So.
LARA Favaretto, Italian artist living in Turin. Her approach to contemporary art is really one of the reasons I do what I do. I have to use so many words to explain emotions or thoughts that I have, and then here comes an artist that makes a sculpture, and it says everything that I ever wanted to say just in that work. And you get close to that work and you feel certain emotions. And it goes back to what Yvonne said about quiet works that you might walk by, but then you stand by them and you feel it.
I don't know where I've seen Lara's work before, but the first time she came on my radar was a confetti sculpture. And it looks very beautiful. It's very elegant, but it's made out of confetti. It's packed into a square, and of course confetti is not going to keep its form forever. It's slowly going to erode. And so I find her work seduces me in sort of the humor and the beauty. By the way, I love concrete. We have a lot of concrete in our house, so I find concrete beautiful. But everyone could probably agree that confetti is festive and fun. And yet there's a sadness and a deepness to her work that attracts me.
It's quite frankly, I didn't really know her very well until we got here and we began to look into the work and look at her background. And obviously we don't have a chance to see other pieces of hers with this one, but I really enjoy, yes, as you said, contemplative aspect to it. And I know in this particular piece, I guess, there's an idea of work being removed as the cement is hardening at the same time. Almost creates a sense of, in a way, urgency that's going on there at the time before it will all harden.
There's a contradiction in the emotions she wants you to feel when she does a work like this. She had a beautiful confetti piece in the Castello di Rivoli, which I was heartbroken to not see when I went this time, but I think the cube must have disintegrated. But we'll speak a little bit as we walk why we are attracted and aspire to do shows with certain artists. But we go from Lara to Jason Dodge.
So really, it's just a blue folded blanket. And why would someone do this? And that is what draws me into most artworks. When I see something that is very simple, I know there's got to be a lot of thought behind it, and that's when the learning starts. And Jason Dodge often doesn't make his work, he sometimes finds it. In this case, I'm going to read you the title because it explains a lot about it. Fernanda Fiera wove yarn the color of night and the length equaling the height from the earth to above the weather in Montevideo, Uruguay. So what he does is he has a series of blankets. They're not all blue because they're the color of night the moment the weaver looked at the sky, and then the weaver, I believe, decides how long the yarn needs to be to get to the top of the weather. And every country in the world has a history of weaving, and every country has a different night sky. And I can imagine that weaver sitting there and making that decision and being empowered by Jason to do that. And that, I find, is very poetic. There is a very strong narrative, but you can almost picture the color of the sky. Like, look at it, it's a beautiful dark blue. The I think the sun must have just set, and then there's this burst of blue that comes out. But other blankets might be gray, there's a storm, or some are pink. And I think it's an ongoing series, and it'll be interesting to see if he ever comes to Canada. We would love that.
He asked a weaver in Iran. So last year I got to see the blanket that is the color of the sky in a particular city in Iran, a city I've never visited. But as a curator, I can tell you that it would be my dream to curate a show of all the blankets, just the blankets, in one beautiful space, not much more, proper lighting, just all the blankets. That's what I would like to do. But I wanted to ask Yvonne if you could tell me a little bit about the work that you started with a group called Partners in Art. I would love you to share the simplicity with which it started, because I think it's very inspiring. It was inspiring to me.
So about 15 years ago, there were a small group of women who worked at the local museum, the Art Gallery of Ontario, decided that they just didn't want to raise money for the museum to pay for toilet paper and turn on the lights. They actually wanted to have an impact in the community, and that our community wasn't collaborating with each other. It was like every institution on their own. There wasn't a lot of dialogue. And so we put together a small group of people, and our goal was to educate them about art, teach them how to run an organization, a not-for-profit, and to fund art projects that might not happen in our city, challenging collaborative projects. And so now we're 150 members. We just did a project that was about $4 million across our country. It involved 14 different educational institutions. We set up a program to help educate curators about programming in our public system. We had 6 curators, many artists. It was a very exciting experience. So 20 women, 150 women now. We have 100 people waiting to come in, and we are not aligned with any institution. We can do what we want, and we do it with a lot of fun and with great, excellent curators.
So as we enter our last booth, we walk towards the beautiful work of artist Harris Epanenonda. It's very important, the environment. It's very sculptural, so everything is thought out and everything is identified. I actually love the way that you talked to me about having seen her work but not knowing her name. So maybe you could start and then I'll finish.
So we were in Castle. It was at Documenta, yes. No,
It was the Documenta.
No, I think it was this. She's been in 2, and it was a plinth on the floor, a very white plinth, and it had a little fence, but the fence was on the inside, and I thought, well, that fence is in the wrong place. And then it stayed with me because there was something odd about it. And often when things don't jive, I want to know more. When there's questions, I start researching. When it's extremely pretty, I'm not as interested. So her work was very elegant, but it was very odd. So,
what did you think, David?
Well, there's a real sculptural component to what she does, and of course she collects pieces randomly. They're very well organized, but they are very many different kinds of pieces that she'll just collect here and there, and then pull them out, and then put them into some kind of context, creating some atmosphere around the piece. So when we look at a lot of her work, the types of pieces that are used are quite different, and then the context within which they're put in are all very, very different. But it creates an interesting atmosphere around each piece. She's quite frankly, when we got here, we missed this completely on the first go around, and it just teaches one that if you go around a couple of times, 2 or 3 or 4 times, suddenly something might catch your eye. This is one that we were surprised that we kind of missed initially, and sort of Abaseh kind of brought it to our attention again to take a look, and we absolutely did. And then we're actually quite fascinated by her work. So it's very much consistent with what we do, but in a kind of a different angle attached to it.
I'm sure you all have noticed as we went through the few works. By the way, we're also here in the presence of one of the legends in the contemporary art world, which is Massimo Minini, and his daughters have their own gallery. Francesca's back there, so they decided to have a joint booth this time. But what is the secret to your success and longevity?
I was with Anish Kapoor a few days ago in
Yeah.
London, and he asked me, how do you choose your artist?
Yes.
And I told him to choose new artists completely unknown is very difficult. You need your nose, some bit eyes,
Yes.
ears to listen what the people say, a little brain, and un po' di cuore,
Un po' di cuore.
poco di cuore. I think the mix of all these elements keep you younger and younger.
What was it about Harris?
Harris was in one day we saw Harris in Documenta. So I want to say we don't choose completely unknown artists, you know, someone who is on the street.
Right.
At the moment we have three lines of intervention with the artists. One is to keep relation with our old artists, Paolini, Buren, I mean our history. The second is to open to the past. So choose artists who have good quality but pretty unknown, or left like Arakawa, Yona Friedman. We had some new entry of artists with 90 years old. Yona Friedman, Sheila X is 84, Paulo Icar is 81, Arakawa recently.
But because we chose Harris.
And the third direction is to open to the new situation. So, one is Aris, from Cyprus, living in Berlin. One is Wilfredo Prieto from Cuba. One come from Brazil. Israele Berlino, Città del Messico. London. So, if you want to have a gallery international and with a good eye, you have to keep your eyes open.
Thank you.
So it's not eyes with shut, but eyes with open.
Thank you. Thank you. So at this juncture, so I wanted to say about Harris and about all the works that we told. For me, the artist that we spoke of today and what I learned with Beverly Pepper, thanks to you, and Anna Danieri and the Back to the Future section, they're storytellers. So I don't know whether it is because I'm a child of the revolution and I had to leave my country and I grew up in a different context and I live in a different context, but stories and how stories are told and how artists look at the world is the reason I work as a curator and as in the medium that I do. And I think Harris is one of the most beautiful and precise storytellers that I have seen. Her work is just absolutely exquisite. And when you talk to her, the thought, the academia, the research that goes into preparing her pieces are amazing. And so it goes beyond just what you see. And I do encourage you to spend some time, maybe not on the opening day of a fair, but on a few days later, to sit with the gallerists, to sit with curators and institutional people and just ask them questions. Never be fearful of that. And your perspective is just as important as mine or David and Yvonne's. It's just a learning process. So maybe some thoughts from you to people here in Turin as to how you go about and what you would recommend coming to a new fair?
Well, take some time beforehand to look at some of the artists, to look at the work, and if a couple interest you, to delve into a little bit. I know it's time consuming, but as we talked about earlier, there are stories behind these works. There are thoughts behind them, and I do find it very, very difficult to appreciate a work, certainly to its full extent, without understanding what what the artist is thinking about. I think contemporary art is very difficult because it does require more effort, a lot more effort.
Yvonne, and how many times have we heard, I could have done that? And really, no.
So when I go to art fair, it's not necessarily about buying and consuming art. It is about finding new people and new ideas. It's about relationship building. It's about meeting new dealers. There's about 3 dealers here that I know I'll stay in touch with. There might not be a work here for me, but I know they have a program that interests us. And I tend to be the one who finds maybe the artist that's exciting and that could drop into what we have in our home and have a dialogue with all our works. David grew up living with really, really great work. He's the one who says, this is the right one for us. He has that sort of intuitive eye. So for me, for him, it's about looking, and for me, it's about talking and connecting with people. And it isn't just with the dealers, it's with the curators, it's people like Abaseh, and it's with the artists if you can get access to them. And it's also about standing in line, getting your coffee, and talking to the person you don't know. Hopefully they speak English because my Spanish is terrible. But talking to them and saying, what did you like here? That constant dialogue makes a better art community.
Thank you.